You walk past a jewelry store window. Gold rings sit under glass, priced in numbers that don't feel real. You don't stop. You don't wonder why. Gold has always been valuable. It has always meant something. But the real answer is far stranger. Somewhere in the river valleys of what is now Bulgaria, around 6,500 years ago, a person picked up a stone that was not a stone. It was heavy in a way stone shouldn't be. It caught the light and held it, and it did not rust, did not crack, did not rot. Everything else in that person's world eventually returned to the earth. This did not. Your ancestors had no word for gold. Metallurgy hadn't been invented. Copper existed, but copper turns green and breaks down. This new substance broke every rule they knew about matter. Wood rotted, bone yellowed, skin aged. And here was something that simply refused. Archaeologist Ernst Pernicka, who has spent decades studying the earliest worked gold in human history, traced some of the oldest gold artifacts on the planet to the Varna necropolis, a burial site on the Black Sea coast. The graves there hold thousands of gold objects, buried with ordinary farmers and herders, generations before writing, before cities existed anywhere in Europe. Why bury it with the dead? Your brain didn't evolve to understand economics. It evolved to understand survival. For nearly the entire span of human existence, your ancestors sorted the world into two categories: things that decay and things that don't. Anything that resisted decay stood out instinctively as something worth attention. There's a concept in evolutionary biology called costly signaling. Developed by the biologist Amos Zahavi, signals only mean something if they're expensive to produce or acquire. A peacock's tail is a liability, yet that's exactly why it works as proof of fitness. Gold worked the same way long before chemistry existed. It was rare, hard to find, and impossible to fake, so it became a signal without anyone deciding it consciously. Short sentence: it wasn't about beauty. It was about what beauty could prove. Think about your own reaction the next time you see something gold. That small pull, even if you don't need it, isn't new. It's old circuitry, the same pattern recognition your ancestors used to notice a fire that wouldn't go out. Here's the twist most people never learn. Gold's value was never really about gold. It was about permanence, and your brain's oldest fear has always been loss. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman, working with Amos Tversky, found that losing something hurts roughly twice as much as gaining the same thing feels good. Your mind is wired to fear loss more than it enjoys gain. And what is more frightening to a mind built around loss than watching everything you touch eventually rot or disappear? Gold offered an exception. In a world with no writing, no photographs, no way to preserve a person beyond memory, gold was one of the only things that could outlast a life without changing. That's why it ended up in graves before it ended up in crowns. Burying gold with a body was an early form of hope, a belief that something permanent could travel with someone into whatever came next. What does that tell you about the objects you value today? You still reach for permanence in quiet ways. You back up your photos so they can't be lost. You keep a grandparent's ring in a drawer you never open, not to wear it, but because you can't imagine it disappearing. Modern economies have layered enormous complexity on top of this instinct. Currencies, markets, digital assets that exist only as numbers on a screen. But underneath it all, the original impulse remains. We trust the things that seem like they won't disappear. There's something moving about that first person in Varna, holding a medal they couldn't explain, deciding it belonged with someone they'd lost. They didn't know gold's chemistry. They only knew that everything else faded, and this did not. In a species terrified of losing what it loves, that was enough to make something sacred. You walk past that jewelry store window again. But now you notice something you didn't before. You're not looking at metal. You're looking at the oldest promise your species ever made to itself. That some things, chosen carefully enough, might just be allowed to last.